Why should every Christian read their Bible? This is a question that we might ask ourselves sometimes. To be upfront, I think reading the Bible is one of the most important things that you can do as a Christian. Far too many people deconstruct from Christianity. One can speculate that one of the reasons is because they don't really know what's in the Bible. I deserve hell. I certainly deserve hell. We all deserve hell. But it's because of Christ and his sacrifice on the cross that we get to go to heaven. Far too many people do not know the bad news that we all deserve hell. It's such an important context to the good news that we do deserve hell. The way we can learn why we deserve hell and the way we can learn who God is and why we are saved and what it means to be saved, what it means to be a Christian. We learn all of that stuff in the Bible. So it's so important for us to read the Bible, to understand the Bible. When you start studying the Bible, you will understand that this Bible is so deep. This Bible is so much deeper than one could ever imagine. Take the Gospel of Matthew as an example. The Gospel of Matthew references the Old Testament to establish that Jesus is the Messiah over 60 times. That alone is just with direct quotations. But it also makes at least 100 allusions or references throughout the book that is not direct quotations. And this is with the book of Matthew only being 27 chapters. So the Old Testament that we have is what the Jews would call the Tanakh. The T stands for Torah, which is the law. N stands for Nevi'im, which is the prophets. And the K stands for Ketuvim, which is the writings. Understanding how deep the Bible is, we understand that the Old Testament pointed towards Christ. The Old Testament is not unnecessary. We should read the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. To understand the New Testament better, it helps to understand the Old Testament as well. In fact, Jesus said he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Jesus was prophesied so many times in the Old Testament. And that's what we see in Matthew, that's what we see in Luke, that's what we see in John, that's what we see in Mark. We see that in all of the Gospels, Jesus being the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. I would say if you haven't read the Bible much, start reading John. And after you read John, read Acts. In Acts, we see Christ resurrected. He goes back to heaven and he's now leading the early church from heaven. We can learn so much about the early church and the early Christians in the book of Acts. We can learn how they evangelized. We can learn about their generosity and we can learn about their love. And we can learn so many things of the early church in the book of Acts. It's a fascinating, amazing book that everyone should read. I would suggest you don't just read one verse a day or 2 verses a day. At the very least, read 1 chapter a day, but I would suggest read even more than 1 chapter. Put a whole hour aside to just read the Bible. Reading the Bible is where we get to learn about God. Another tip reading the Bible is be curious about things. Research things. Don't be afraid to have questions. I think questions are great. Being curious will lead you to want to read more. So be curious reading the Bible. If I'm going to be totally honest, I'm afraid that sometimes we Christians stay away from reading the Bible because we think that if we're going to read the Bible too much, we're not going to want to go out and evangelize and do all of that stuff. I think that's a lie. I don't think that's true. The more I read the Bible, the more I fall in love with Christ. The more I read the Bible, the more I know I'm a sinner in need of Christ. The more I read the Bible, the more I want to go out there and evangelize. Know the Bible in such a way that you want to follow Christ and be obedient to him. But then again, read the Old Testament as well. You can start with Genesis. That's what I did. I just started in Genesis and read through the whole book. It's gonna be heavy. It's gonna be hard sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. But when you're at the end of it, it's so worth it. You just understand who the Christ is so much more. And use resources. Use good resources as well as you read through the Bible. You can see Christ throughout the whole Bible.